He told me to talk to my deaf son like a normal person. I said, "No." The word left my mouth like a stone flung into still water, and the ripples hit every table in the room. I stood there with the tray balanced on my palm, stemware chiming softly from the shock of his glass hitting linen, crystal shivering the way my knees wanted to. 60 strangers turned in a single motion, their conversations snipped mid-sentence, the chandeliers burning above us like a verdict. I could feel the weight of their eyes, and, beneath that, the heavier weight of my own life. 3 days until rent, 3 digits in my account, a lock with a landlord's key, ticking behind my ribs like a cheap clock I couldn't afford to replace. I looked past the billionaire's smile, the kind that didn't reach the eyes because it never had to, and fixed on the young man at the end of the table, the one who had been pretending to be invisible long before I arrived with champagne. The chandelier's light caught in his hearing aids and turned them to 2 small beacons, and I understood how loud humiliation can sound even when it's spoken in a whisper, or a laugh, or the slap of a palm against a glass stem. His father had ordered me to use my voice and stop encouraging his disability, as if kindness were a faulty habit, as if accommodation were a disease. The tray didn't dip, my hand didn't shake. It helped to keep talking. "You're a bully," I told the father with the same tone I used to list the catch of the day, because my voice had to climb a ladder of money to reach him, and calm made the rungs steady. Then I turned my mouth toward the son so he could see every syllable, and I let the truth carry itself. "You are not broken. You don't need to be fixed. Deaf is not a synonym for less." I watched his eyes, and there it was, the smallest change. Like the first breeze that tells a storm it's not the only weather in town. The room breathed in strange harmony. Murmurs rose around us like a tide pulling chairs and cuffs and careful faces into something unplanned. From a corner, my manager's expression collapsed into that pleading wince he saves for moments when money might be offended. Phones lifted, a glittering forest of glass held steady by hands that had shaken for other reasons this year. The billionaire laughed again, louder now, a man accustomed to shaping acoustics for his comfort. Somewhere in the noise, I found the sentence that would cost me. If I lose my job tonight, I keep my soul. I didn't raise my voice to reach him. I raised it to reach the others, the hostess who had learned to swallow small insults because she needed tips for nursing school, the dishwasher with a second job and a third language, the woman at table 7 who had been staring at her plate since her date warned her he wasn't interested in projects. I named the humiliation for what it was. I called out the performance. I asked the question no one ever asks men like him because they own the microphone. Are you trying to fix your son or your ego? It was like tapping a pane of glass to see how thick it is. The sound it made told me everything. Forks froze. Knives paused mid-saw. The air went thin enough to see through. He stepped into my space and pointed at my apron as if it were a uniform from the wrong country, as if belonging were stitched to fabric, and he was the border guard. He promised to end my employment in this city. He promised influence like a storm cloud, wide, ready, inevitable. I felt the old panic gather at the base of my throat, the kind that used to send me to the walk-in fridge to count to 20 with my hands pressed against my face. Then I looked at the sun again. He had risen without meaning to, a hand hovering in the air between us, as if language might be a bridge if someone would just lay down the first plank. He was bright red with shame, and also impossibly standing. Sometimes the body knows what the mouth hasn't said yet. "Stop," he told his father, voice catching and then landing. "Stop." And the room obeyed. He said he was deaf, not broken and proud. He said the only thing he was ashamed of in this building was the man who had raised him to believe quiet was obedience. The applause started like hail. 1 table, then 2, then all of them thundering down. The billionaire's friends slid in their chairs and found sudden fascination in their napkins. I should have been frightened. Instead, I felt a lightness I hadn't met since childhood, that clean sensation you get when the truth finally stands up inside you and stretches to its full height. He left. He walked out of the Golden Palm with his back straight, and the door breathed on its hinge as if the entire building had been holding its breath. Someone near the bar said, "I got all of it," and lifted a phone like a flare. Somewhere else a woman was crying into her hands. My manager hovered, half scolding, half calculating, unsure which number meant more tonight, the billionaire's bar tab or the number of cameras pointed at his face. I could hear the bodyguards shifting their weight, and I realized I was still holding the tray, a silly, ordinary thing, heavy with glasses and promise and physics. I've learned that courage is often just one sentence longer than you think you can manage, so I gave the last one away, to the room, to myself. I will not be the quiet part of someone else's cruelty. Then I set the tray on the tablecloth with a care that felt like prayer and waited to see how expensive that vow would be. The billionaire smiled, and it was the expression you see on paintings of emperors when they're about to wipe cities off maps with a gesture you can't undo. "You're fired," he said serenely, as if he were handing me a weather report and not rewriting my month. The room inhaled again, hard and collective. 3 days earlier, my problems had a number. One $1,800, and one $800 problem sat on my floor while $340 cowered in my bank app. The eviction notice had the officious warmth of a parking ticket and the finality of a gravestone, and I stood over it barefoot in a kitchen that wasn't really a kitchen, just a countertop and a coil stove that smelled like old storms. The walls in my studio were so thin I could trace my neighbor's insomnia by the pattern of his coughing, and that morning I matched my breath to his like we were practicing for a duet neither of us wanted to sing. I boiled water for noodles, then let it sit untouched because it felt too much like surrender to eat them for breakfast. The landlord's voice from last month, a polite warning delivered with an eye on his watch, played again in my head, and I realized how many conversations in this city end with you nodding to avoid becoming a problem. I dressed by habit more than hope. Black pants worn shiny at the thighs, white shirt steamed with the shower because the iron died last winter and never resurrected, hair pinned in the quick, efficient style of someone who can't afford to be looked at too long. My shoes had the perfect amount of give in the sole to make 10 miles feel like 8, and I told myself that was a kind of wealth. On the bus, the city slid by in a sequence of windows that looked like other windows, and I read the route map because it was better than reading my bank balance again. The golden palm rose from the sidewalk like a chandelier had decided to try being a building. I could smell truffle oil before the automatic doors parted, and beneath it, bleach and ambition. We clocked in with the slow resignation of people who knew precisely how their day would go and how little it would matter to the people they were about to serve. The dishwasher blasted steam like a train bracing for winter. The pastry chef muttered to himself in French, which made him sound like a kinder person than he actually was. The hostess wore lipstick that matched the carpet because someone had told her once that cohesion sold elegance, and she had never been paid to disagree. When the manager called a quick meeting, he arranged his features into corporate sincerity, that mask managers get issued with their name tags. "Christopher Hartwell is dining with us tonight," he said, and the air snapped like a flag. You could feel the relief move through the staff like a breeze with a direction, shoulders dropping, eyes lowering, the private mathematics of avoidance, everyone calculating how to tuck themselves out of the billionaire's line of sight. He turned to me with a look that said he was sorry and also not remotely sorry at all. "Mary, he's yours." Around me, exhalations disguised as coughs and little laughs let loose. Someone whispered, "Thank God," with the intimacy of a prayer they didn't believe in. I absorbed it like I absorbed everything, a steady nod, a yes of the body, the kind of agreement people mistake for consent, when what it really is survival. In the staff restroom's mirror, the fluorescent light found every late night I hadn't slept. I practiced a smile that didn't show desperation, adjusted the line of my collar, and told my hands to stop doing that fluttering thing they did when I thought about money. The trick is to make service look supernatural when it is actually just choreography. Left hand, right hand, little bow, listening face, retreat. I reminded myself that the dining room was a stage I had memorized, that I could walk it blind, that the names on the booking sheet were just letters lined up to look important. It helped to lie to myself in tiny increments. I told my heartbeat it could wait until after close to do the fast part. It ignored me, but softly. If I survive his table, I survive the month. That was the bargain I made with the morning. When the host stand phone rang and a voice announced itself with the crisp courtesy, "People save for money," the room adjusted the way you brace when an elevator starts to move. I polished the same glass 3 times to keep from wringing my hands like laundry. The sous chef shouted times, and I fed them back with the smooth accuracy of someone who had learned to be a metronome. Somewhere in the kitchen a timer sang, and a cook snapped it silent, the pre-service catechism of heat and precision. It should have calmed me. It didn't. The Golden Palm at 5:55 was a machine that ran on other people's power. Valets rehearsed a kind of bow that looked respectful from the front and resentful from the back. The maitre d' reset his cuffs with one elegant tug, as if elegance could be pulled on like a glove. I pressed my order pad into my apron pocket and told myself I had done harder things than carry wine to men who thought grapes were their employees. The truth is I hadn't. Not lately. I will show up, even if no one shows up for me. The first hint of him wasn't sound. It was the way the valet's posture changed, the spine going a little straighter, the smile shaving a centimeter off the top to make room for fear. Then the car itself. A black shape that seemed to absorb light and attention and duty. It eased to the curb without acknowledging friction, and the doors opened with the hush of something that had been engineered to deny the existence of effort. 2 bodyguards stepped out first, twin shadows in charcoal, scanning the street like they were expecting history to try something. The air outside the revolving door changed temperature by a degree I could feel from 20 feet away, the way a storm announces itself in pressure and then rain. They say power arrives before it opens the door, and that afternoon I learned how literal that can be. The hostess smoothed her dress twice. Someone in the bar knocked over a spoon and apologized to it. I drew a breath I hoped was invisible and stepped forward, the script already on my tongue, the smile already shaped. Behind my ribs, the eviction notice folded itself into a sharper corner and waited. Power changes the air before it opens the door. He walked in like a weather system. We all adjusted our breathing. The revolving door took him in as if the building already knew his weight, and the air in the foyer dropped half a degree the instant his shoes met marble. Charcoal suit pressed so precisely, it made the rest of us look like smudges, hair slicked to a shine that turned the chandeliers into a private constellation. And that little snap of his fingers at the hostess. 2 crisp syllables of skin that said he didn't ask for service so much as claim it. The men orbiting him carried their laughter the way men carry weapons when they know a crowd will part. Every punchline was an elbow. I stood where the maitre d' liked me to stand when the powerful arrived, 1 pace behind the welcome, 1 breath ahead of the first demand, and watched the room smooth itself for him. Napkins squared, postures corrected, smiles widened by fractions only money can measure. I approached with my order pad, the same way I always do, like I'm carrying a bridge, not a menu. "Good evening, gentlemen. May I?" He didn't look at me, only past me, as if the room beyond my shoulder might be more interesting than the woman blocking his view. "Champagne," he said, misnaming the bottle on purpose, lazy vowels testing whether the help would dare correct a storm. "The 2008 Don Perigno." His friends snorted. That taught cruelty that passes for sophistication in people who have never needed a dictionary. I named the wine properly, not sharp, not meek, just accurate. "Dom Perignon, sir, the 2008, and let the syllables land without apology. He glanced at me for the first time, not with appreciation, but with the speculative interest you give a tool that might be useful in an emergency. They ordered rare steaks with the speed of men who have never waited for anything but applause. One wanted his seared on a griddle, so it doesn't taste like the kitchen. Another demanded a sauce altered to his memory of a trip to Paris that probably happened on a runway. and the third asked for a substitution that made the dish into a different dish and then insisted it remain the same price. I wrote it all because that is what I do. I turn preference into choreography and make sure no one sees me count. I asked about sides and temperatures and allergies like an anchorwoman during a hurricane, clear and imperturbable, and when they were finished with their wishes, I vanished at the exact angle that signals respect without submission. This is a profession built on disappearing in a way that leaves evidence, refilled glasses, silent plates that arrive at precisely the moment hunger becomes grievance, a napkin folded while a conversation crests. I made my first lap to the kitchen with the sound of his laughter chasing my heels like a small trained dog that bites. At the host stand, the floor plan glowed on the tablet in tidy rectangles. In real life, those rectangles were people, and people are never tidy. The wine cooler sighed, the pastry chef shouted times, the dishwasher slammed a rack home with the determination of a man solving a problem with noise. I plated their amuse-bouches, tiny bites engineered to convince rich mouths that the evening had begun, and carried them back with my tray floating at chin level, balanced by years of muscle memory, and the knowledge that dropping something in front of a man like Christopher Hartwell has nothing to do with gravity and everything to do with consequences. At the table, they performed consumption. The jokes turned coarse when they thought the women nearby couldn't hear. The complaints grew technical when the food came, as if engineering flawlessness kept their worlds from cracking. He mispronounced something else just to see who would correct him and smirked when I did. I could have hated him more easily if he had been obviously monstrous. Instead, he was the particular kind of ordinary that money polishes to a blinding sheen, a man who had learned long ago that the world rearranges itself when he clears his throat. I've carried heavier plates than men's egos, but not by much. That thought slid across my mind as I adjusted a knife 2 millimeters to the left and watched his friends clock my competence like it was part of the decor. Behind me, the bar popped a cork, and a woman laughed in the complicated way women laugh when they're deciding whether to leave. I topped off water before it was asked for, refolded a napkin that had fallen like a fainting spell, and counted my steps between their needs and the kitchen's brutal grace. The restaurant pulsed, orders in and out, a heartbeat I could keep even if you blindfolded me. I can be invisible and still be watching. That is the promise I made to myself every night at the Golden Palm, to notice what the money tried to erase. So when the door swung and a red hoodie hesitated at the threshold, I saw him too. The fabric was wrong for this room, the posture too careful, the hesitation honest in a way we rarely admit in a place that sells confidence by the ounce. He stood just long enough for the hostess to glance up and then glance away, trained to prioritize those who make a show of belonging. He didn't make a show. He closed his eyes for a single breath, opened them, and located the orbit he was entering. The hoodie crossed the floor like a truth, quiet and uninvited, and the table felt it before anyone named it. The billionaire didn't look up. His friends didn't pause. The sun arrived at the edge of the universe his father had built and hovered there, ready to be told where to sit, how to be, what to pretend to enjoy. I was 2 steps away with a tray of wine that cost 3 weeks of my life, and in that pane of glass you get before a moment decides what kind of story it will be, I understood the whole evening had been only prologue. A red hoodie hesitates in the doorway. His son. He sat where sound couldn't find him. Humiliation could. The far seat was empty by design, a polite exile at the edge of linen, and that's where the hostess placed him when she finally noticed. The way you set a glass on a table that's already crowded and hope it won't tip. The chandeliers threw light the way chandeliers always do, indifferent to context, and it caught in the paired shells tucked behind his ears. Hearing aids glint when they meet opulence, twin signals that say both I am listening and I have learned to live where voices don't always come. He touched his father's sleeve with the gentleness of someone trained to make himself small, and the response was immediate and precise. A flinch, not of surprise but of impatience, the shrug of a man inconvenienced by being seen. I started with the script, because scripts are how we build bridges when we're afraid we'll drown. "Good evening, gentlemen, may I?" He didn't see me. Not wouldn't, couldn't. His eyes were on the menu with that fixed concentration people use when they're pretending reading is a choice and not a refuge. I tried again, a notch louder, as if volume were a key. He stayed in the room inside his head where sound knocks and waits. So I did the thing I wish someone had taught me to do sooner. I moved. I stepped into his eye line and lowered my chin so my mouth was level with his attention, and I slowed my lips until the syllables had weight. "Hi, I'm Mary. What would you like to eat?" The change was immediate. Surprise blinked, then relief, that quick softening when you realize someone has adjusted to you instead of insisting you adjust to them. He pointed with a fingertip, then said, careful and clear, "Grilled salmon, please." Before I could say, "Great choice," his father cut the air like rope. "He'll have water," he announced, voice that managerial baritone men use when they want the room to know who signs the checks. He said it without looking at the son he was subtracting from the conversation. I nodded, because a nod can mean more than agreement. It can mean I see what you think you're doing, and I am not finished here. I held the son's gaze and mouthed, "Anything to drink?" He hesitated, then lifted his hands and shaped the air with them, a small graceful constellation of motion that asked me a question I couldn't read. "I don't know ASL. I wish I had learned sooner." I told him so with my face and my hands, palms open, shoulders a little lifted, apology without apology. He nodded once, and for a second the whole interaction felt like two people meeting halfway across a canyon while the men on the ridge threw rocks and called it sport. The glass detonated on linen like a shot. It was the sound of money demonstrating it can still make noise without raising its voice. He had slammed his champagne down not because the moment required drama, but because he was bored without it. "Are you seriously trying to talk to my deaf son with your hands?" he said. And his friends arranged their faces into the masks they wear when they know the joke is about to be ugly, and they plan to laugh anyway. He turned to the tables around us like a ringmaster presenting an act that had never been shown before. He asked if I was qualified, if I had the degrees his life respects, if I intended to embarrass him with my amateur empathy. When the rich feel threatened by kindness, they often confuse it with insult. If I can't speak his language, I can still speak his worth. That sentence rose in me like a tide, and I let it carry me forward because I had nothing else that would float. I apologized to the son again with my hands, and then did the other thing I could do. I made sure my mouth told him the truth, slowly enough for him to catch every vowel. "You matter. You are fine. We can do this." His father kept talking, a machine unburdened by the need to check whether the people it references are present. He warned me to use my voice, not my hands, as if sound were morality. He said I should stop encouraging his disability, as if accommodation were a drug and I was the dealer. He called me sweetheart, and nobody and worse, and every time the word landed, I watched the son's shoulders take the impact, not mine. I thought about the eviction notice under my toaster, about the $340 cowering in my bank app, about the manager's inevitable meeting where he would blame my mouth for the weather another man created. I thought about how many times I had swallowed a moment like this to save a shift, and how those swallowed moments had collected like stones in my chest. The tray in my hand felt suddenly lighter than his contempt, and that was how I knew the balance had changed. Around us, the restaurant had entered that stunned theater silence where strangers turn into witnesses, phones rise like periscopes, and a single sentence can decide whether a night becomes a story. "Stop encouraging his disability," he said, so sure that cruelty was a kind of care. "Use your voice." The words hit the table and spread like oil. "Stop encouraging his disability," he says. "Use your voice." At first it leaves my mouth almost like a cough, half breath, half defiance, so soft that it feels like a private objection flung against a wall of money and posture. Yet the silence in the golden palm is so taut that even a soft syllable carries, skimming across glass and linen until it lands and unsettles the cutlery. I feel it in my arms where the tray rides steady as a boat. in my knees that have learned to bend under other people's appetites, in my jaw that has smiled through 1,000 tiny indignities. And because I can feel it, I say it again, not as apology, but as correction. And the second time is louder, shaped with air and decision. No. Now the room hears both, first the tremor, then the spine, and it rearranges itself around. The word, "the way furniture shifts during a storm, inch by inch," then all at once. He blinks, not because he misheard me, but because men like him are not accustomed to hearing the kind of sentence that does not end with "sir." The glass he slammed moments ago leaves a damp ring that halos his entitlement, and in that gleam, I watch the weight of habit settle back on his shoulders. "What did you just say?" he asks, each syllable heavy with the expectation that I will step backward into the script he prefers and apologize for improvising. But I have watched his son's face flood and harden, watched the way humiliation finds the far end of a table faster than water finds a low place, and I understand that the script is how people like me are taught to keep other people like him comfortable, while someone else's dignity bleeds. I said no, I repeat, not louder now, just truer, and I let my eyes stay on his so he knows I am not speaking by accident. A strange calm spreads through me, the kind that arrives when the worst thing has already happened inside your imagination, and there is nothing left to fear but your own voice going quiet. "You are a bully," I say, "because if I am breaking furniture, I may as well move the heavy pieces first, and he is your son." I tilt my chin toward Ethan, making sure my lips are slow enough for him to read, and I give him back the names his father has been stealing all evening. Not burden, not embarrassment, not project, not disappointment. Son, person, Ethan. The air shifts. In the mirrored columns I catch the reflection of faces pivoting, the practiced smirks of his friends faltering as if someone tugged a rug under their chairs. The soft hiss of fabric rises as strangers lean in. There is a sound I have never heard in this room before, a table at the edge beginning to clap, hesitant at first, the way a witness tests whether truth is allowed, and then another, until the rhythm becomes a language everyone can understand. My legs threaten to fold, but they don't. I place the tray on a side stand because everything that needs to be carried now is not made of crystal. His mouth opens in the shape of money about to scold, and he tries to fill the room with his resume. How many doctors, how many therapies, how much he has spent to fix what he insists is broken. But the numbers fall heavy and roll away because the math is wrong. "Fix him, or fix your ego?" I ask, and the forks stop moving. The question is not rhetorical. It is a mirror I hold up at his preferred angle so he can admire himself and feel sick at the same time. For a beat he has nothing to say, just a pulse beating hard against a starched collar. I feel my own pulse answer it, not with triumph, but with clarity. I could list the ways I have learned to survive men like him, how rent collects like weather in my chest, how managers use schedules like levers, how a chandelier can mock you with the price of its light, but survival without a spine is just a longer fall. So I give myself a rule I can afford to keep. I will spend my last dollar on truth. If I am leaving this room unemployed, I am not leaving it anonymous. The word no is still there between us like a small table we keep circling, and every time he tries to kick it aside, it slides back, sturdy with the weight of everyone who has ever wished they'd said it before the room ruined them. He points at me then, index finger rigid like a gavel trying to invent a courtroom. "You'll never work here again," he declares, as if banishment were a trick he thought up and patented. The finger shakes, the only tremor he has allowed himself all evening, and I notice the thread of fear braided into his threat. I do not smile, because this isn't that kind of victory, but I also do not flinch. Somewhere behind me a chair scrapes, and a voice near the bar says, "She's right." And the floor manager appears in my peripheral vision, pale around the lips, already calculating severance and statements. My body remembers the eviction notice on my kitchen floor, the 3 digits in my bank app, the taste of instant noodles at midnight. And my mouth remembers a different hunger that burns slower and keeps you human. I turn my head deliberately so Ethan can catch the shape of what I say next. You don't need to be fixed, I tell him, each word paced like a lifeline. And then to his father, because he insists on a performance, you need to learn the difference between parenting and public relations. The line ripples outward, hitting tables in small, satisfying waves. His friends stare into their napkins as if linen might absorb complicity. A woman in a black dress stands and says, "Leave her alone," with the steady fury of someone who has swallowed too much at too many tables, and the applause grows teeth. He opens his mouth for one more edict, one more attempt to turn my no back into a yes by attaching a price to it. But another voice arrives, not as thunder, not as management, but as something quieter and more permanent, the sound of a person claiming his own throat. He points at me like a gavel. "You'll never work here again." The word stop doesn't shake the crystal or rattle the chandeliers. It doesn't need to. It knifes through the room's expensive hush with the authority of someone who has been told all his life that silence is safer and decides to live anyway. Ethan is on his feet before the staff can do their choreography of de-escalation, before the bodyguards can materialize, before his father can finish assembling the expression he uses for disobedient underlings. He is shaking, but the kind of shaking that means the body is burning fuel to keep the soul warm, and when he says, "Just stop, Dad," the last word lands not as a plea but as a boundary. His voice has the music of effort, the distinct cadence of a person who has taught himself to meet the hearing world. Halfway, and for the first time all night, the far end of the table is not the loneliest place in the room. Every eye finds him. Even his father looks, really looks, the way a man looks when a familiar object suddenly refuses to perform. "Sit down," Christopher says reflexively, and the command sounds smaller than it did a minute ago, like a bell rung in an empty church. Ethan doesn't sit. He straightens, inhales, and threads his next sentence through the long practice of being misunderstood. "I'm deaf," he says, and here his hands underline his words, shaping the air in the grammar of a life his father has refused to learn. Not stupid, not broken, deaf. The syllables are clear, the consonants careful, and with each one he lays a plank over the canyon between them. There is a tremor in my own chest I didn't know I was holding until he keeps going. "You tell people you want a normal life for me," he says, eyes not leaving his father's. "But what you want is a quiet life for you, one where you don't have to be embarrassed that your son doesn't sound like your friends." A couple at the next table exhales a collective, "Oh, that seems to lighten the room by a degree." His father tries a laugh that doesn't land. "Don't be ridiculous," he says, reaching for that polished tone he used earlier when he ordered me to use my voice. But the sentence lists before it can dock. "I spend more money than—" "On making me disappear," Ethan interrupts, and now his voice is steadier, stronger, as if courage were a muscle you can feel grow in real time. "On teaching me to pass, to pretend, to be an investment that pays in your kind of pride." I realize I am breathing with him, matching my inhales to his, as if the whole room has become a pair of lungs. He glances at me, not for permission, not for help, just to anchor in a face that is not trying to edit him, and there is a flicker of gratitude that humbles me more than any applause ever could. "Thank you," he says, not loudly but fully, for being braver than I was. I shake my head a millimeter, because the courage was always his. I only pointed to the door, but he's already turning back to the man whose shadow he has had to learn to step out of. "I'm proud of being deaf," he says, and the word proud enters the room like a new light source, changing the way every surface shines. "I'm proud of my community. I'm not proud of you." The sentence hangs there, and for once his father does not try to swat it from the air. You can almost hear a life's worth of optics crack. The photo ops at charity galas, the speeches about inclusion written by publicists, the expensive efforts to buy the absence of discomfort. He opens his mouth, closes it, and looks down at the ring of moisture his glass left on linen as if reputation could be blotted as easily. No one rescues him from the quiet. The friends who laughed at his jokes earlier cultivate sudden fascination with their cuticles. My manager, pale and sweating, is calculating damages of a different kind now. Ethan exhales, a long, decisive sound that changes the temperature of my bones. He reaches for his hoodie, red against the room's disciplined neutrals, and he leaves his napkin on the table, not tossed, not folded, just released, the way a person leaves a belief. He turns, and the room answers him not with sympathy, not with voyeurism, but with something like respect. The first clap lands near the bar, where a woman with short hair and steel in her spine has been watching with her phone tilted toward Justice. Another follows at a foretop by the window, then another near the host stand, until the exits are mapped with applause. It isn't triumphal, it is tidal. It follows him as he walks, steady as ballast, and when he pushes through the revolving door, the glass catches a smear of fingerprints that looks, in the chandelier's reflection, like a constellation. Behind me, a whisper. I got it all on video. The words are not breathless with gossip. They are practical, a note taken in the ledger of a night that will need proof. The woman near the bar, the one who started clapping first, holds her phone in both hands, thumbs poised like the tip of a pen over a signature. The screen glows with the frozen frame of a finger pointed at my face, of a young man standing at the edge of the table that was built to exclude him, of a waitress whose mouth is open in a word that is small and seismic. The caption writes itself in her whisper before it appears in text. Waitress versus Billionaire. She hesitates for a heartbeat, not for permission but for accuracy. Then her thumb taps, and a progress bar begins to climb, as if measuring the distance between one life and the next. My manager materializes to hiss my name and the word office, but the room is louder than he is now. Strangers are speaking to one another, not about specials or real estate, but about what they just watched. A man in a suit that could pay my rent twice over wipes his eyes with the back of his hand and says to no one, "Good," as if confession could change him. A server from the other side of the room squeezes my elbow in that quick code we use when the night is brutal, and we still have to carry plates. I realize my hands are empty. At some point, I set down the work the room expected me to do, so I could do the work the room needed. By the time I reach the swing door to the kitchen, the video is already out of the building and into a world that has a different appetite. I picture it traveling from palm to palm, caption to caption, becoming the kind of story that makes other people stand a little sooner, say no a little louder, move the furniture that is pinning them in place. I do not know yet that before the candles are blown out at closing, views will climb into the tens of thousands, that by dawn the number will look like a mistake, that by afternoon there will be statements and trending tags and emails with subject lines I have never seen attached to my name. All I know is the way the word stop sounded in Ethan's mouth, quiet, final, like a door clicking open, and the way the room relearned how to breathe. Upload button taps. A caption types itself. Waitress vs. Billionaire. I didn't sleep so much as pace the edges of my studio with my apron still knotted at my waist. The chandelier glare of the golden palm still burned into my retinas, the word no still vibrating in my ribs. 10 minutes after I slid the bolt on my door, the first ping landed. Someone had posted the clip. The thumbnail froze me mid-breath. Tray abandoned on a side stand, finger pointed like a verdict. Ethan half risen at the far end of the table. I clicked, watched the night play itself in miniature on a 5-inch screen, then watched it again as if I could learn a better way to have been brave. At the bottom of the video, a counter started breathing. 50,000 views in 30 minutes. The comments flowered into a field that didn't care about dress codes. I was a server for 15 years. I've never seen anyone do this. Deaf mom here, crying. Name her. My phone vibrated so hard across the nightstand it walked itself into the lamp and made it wobble. The woman who'd uploaded it, username in lowercase, profile photo unsmiling, had captioned it, Waitress destroys billionaire for mocking his deaf son. That word, destroys, wasn't how I would have chosen it, but the internet is not a dining room. It doesn't negotiate its verbs. By midnight, the counter rolled over 1 million, and the headline machine found its appetite. Tiles stacked across my screen like plates. Tech mogul humiliates deaf son. Waitress intervenes. Silence isn't golden. Use your voice? She did. Each outlet took a different angle, but the clip kept beating like a single drum underneath all of them. In duet after duet, creators split the frame to make room for their faces and the fury in their hands. Deaf TikTok didn't wait for permission. Stitches bloomed by the hour. Interpreters glossed the moment his glass detonated on linen. Advocates paused the frame to teach terms I'd never learned. Autism, oralism, all the isms that had hovered unnamed over that table all night. Allies added captions, then posted the versions again, then posted them again with better contrast because access isn't an afterthought when it's your own body that needs the door opened. Hashtags learned to sign. Deaf pride, die. Hands speak. Nothing about us without us. My name, to strangers just a syllable on a receipt, became a flag people lifted. Mary said no, so I could say no. Mary, I wish I'd had you at my table when he told me to smile. Mary, tell us where to tip. I wasn't ready for that. I didn't know how to hold praise without setting my hands on fire. The Golden Palms number lit my phone while I was still answering DMs. That started with, I know you probably won't see this, followed by stories that made me want to smash every champagne flute we own. I let the calls go to voicemail. Then I listened anyway, because fear still knows my number by heart. The first message was my manager's voice, stripped of all the slippery varnish. Bring your uniform tomorrow. We need to talk. He didn't say fired, but he didn't have to. The word had already been said to my face under a chandelier. My phone shook on the nightstand like a trapped bird, and every time I stilled it, it remembered another wing. At 2 a.m., a woman I didn't know tagged me in a thread where deaf lawyers explained how to file complaints that don't vanish in a pile on a desk. At 3, a teacher posted a video from her classroom where every kid in a row signed thank you. At 4, a chef in Chicago offered a job with benefits like a hand held out in daylight. By dawn, the clip had 15 million views, and the morning shows were saying my name with the careful brightness they save for weather and scandal. A reporter called to ask if I'd appear live to tell your truth. I hung up polite because I don't know how to perform what was never meant to be theater. The woman who uploaded the video DM'd, "Do you want me to take it down?" I stared at those words, the only moment all night where the power to make the room quiet again felt like a button I could press. I typed, erased, typed again. No, leave it, it's bigger than me. There is a part of me that has always measured survival by how quietly I could work, how many plates I could carry without rattling, how perfectly I could make myself the background to other people's certainty. The internet does not allow backgrounds. It drags everything to the foreground and floods it with light. So I stood where the echo was loudest, even if it lit all my flaws. Promise reminder, if truth is loud, I'll stand where it echoes. By 8 a.m., the comms teams started their choreography. A statement from his office slid into the feeds with the tone of a damp towel. A regrettable misunderstanding. Mr. Hartwell has always supported accessibility. A second statement named a donation figure with too many zeros and too little soul. They changed the font, then changed the phrasing, then changed the comments to off. The clip didn't care. It kept sprinting through timelines like a rumor and a reckoning. An analyst on cable news made a face like he'd bitten a seed and said the material risk was minimal. The PR firms who dressed disaster for work used the word manageable like a charm. At 9:30 a.m., when the bell rang and numbers became weather, the market disagreed. The chart started obedient, then flinched, then dropped as if someone had cut a rope. I watched the red candle sink on a screen I couldn't afford but could borrow. Miguel from the kitchen texted me a screenshot because cooks know how to season a moment. Down 22% by coffee time. The networks swapped their manageable voices for something that sounded like surf. By noon, the board had convened. Men and one woman in a glass box, faces turned toward a future they couldn't spin. The statement that came after used all the phrases that mean get out without saying it. Transition of leadership, renewed focus, confidence in our values. He stepped down, which is a polite way of describing a fall when you want to save everyone's ankles. Outside the headquarters, the sidewalk learned a new rhythm. Drums, yes, protests need a heartbeat, but also hands, whole rows of them moving in unison. Interpreters leading chants that traveled without amplifiers. The camera crews had to back up to fit it all. Students with homemade signs, parents with kids on their shoulders, old men in hats with pins that told histories I don't know yet, lines of deaf organizers directing traffic like conductors. Every time a reporter pointed a microphone and asked a question they couldn't hear, they laughed and signed, "We don't need your noise," then tapped their phones and showed captions they'd made themselves. Accessibility wasn't charity out there. It was logistics. A woman held a poster that read, "Loud hands, quiet power," and another raised one that said, "Teach your mouth some humility." Meanwhile, my inbox turned over and over like a river rock in fast water. 30 job offers by lunchtime, then more as the clip leapt languages. Owners wrote with pay numbers I had never seen attached to my name, shifts that didn't punish you for being human, promises that sounded like apologies from a whole industry. A pastry chef in Portland offered to teach me laminated doughs if I wanted a side quest. A small place in Queens said they had a staff ASL class every Thursday, come as you are. A hotel in New Orleans included housing in case I needed to leave fast. I scrolled with the kind of care you use handling hot pans, grateful, startled, not wanting to drop any of it. Then the message that made me sit down on the edge of my unmade bed. "We're raising something for you." A deaf organizer I'd never met had launched a fundraiser with a page that said, "She stood up for us when it could cost her everything." The total blinked like a heartbeat. $18,000, then $47,000, then $103,000, then a number I didn't know how to hold without my hands shaking. I thought about the eviction notice on my floor, the number that had owned my breath, and I sobbed in a way that scared me because relief and shame arrived braided together. How do you accept help without rewriting yourself as helpless? I typed a note back to her. I will use this to breathe, yes, and to build something that isn't just mine. She replied with a heart spelled in fingers. My screen lit again with a number I didn't recognize, and the text was a sentence I could feel in my bones. "Can we meet?" Ethan. I stared until the letters blurred. Then I typed yes and suggested a place where the coffee is honest and the chairs are unforgiving. The kind of cafe where nobody performs because the light is already good. He said tomorrow, and the ... of his typing lasted long enough for me to understand. He was editing courage into his message. "Thank you for being braver than I was," he wrote again, and I answered with the truth I'd felt under the chandeliers. "You already had the bravery. I just named it." The day kept unfolding like a map no one knew we'd need. Clients canceled contracts with press releases that pretended morality but sounded like spreadsheets. A pension fund issued a statement about fiduciary responsibility in the age of viral ethics. Stock tickers turned one man's private rot into public arithmetic. In a corner of the screen, I watched a small clip on loop, his company's logo being peeled off the glass lobby wall while, outside, 2 interpreters took turns leading a chant translated 3 ways across a single crowd. Voice, sign, text, on a homemade LED board. That's what power looks like when you take it apart and pass it around. Readable, repeatable, shared. Offers kept coming, but there was one email I held with both hands. A family-run restaurant downtown said they'd been quietly adding visual menus and training every server in basic signing. The owner wrote, "We can pay triple what you make now and still sleep at night." Attached was a photo of their staff practicing hand shapes between lunch and dinner rush. Laughter blurred, hands in motion, a whiteboard behind them where someone had written "Welcome" in block letters, and underneath it the sign drawn in arrows. I didn't say yes yet, not because I wanted better, but because the day had already given me more than I knew how to steward. Promise reminder: if I started a fire, I will use it to warm, not burn. In the afternoon, the golden palm finally remembered how to dial. The manager texted, "We can reconsider if you post a clarification that you were overwhelmed. Clarification is what people ask for when they want you to put the furniture back where they had it." I typed just 2 words and let them carry the shape of my entire spine. No, thanks. Then I blocked the number before he could reply with a shift schedule shaped like punishment. When the sun slid down behind the tenements and the studio turned the color of a peach left too long on a sill, I stood at the sink and washed the last 2 plates I own with the care I use for crystal I'll never touch again. I practiced the signs I'd learned in the last 12 hours. Thank you, proud, name, enough. In the reflection of my streaked window until my hands stopped looking like someone else's. On my phone, the fundraiser ticked over another 1,000. Across town, the glass lobby collected footprints and tape residue. In the feeds, the clip kept telling the story the same way every time, unedited, unafraid. We picked a small coffee shop with bad chairs and good light for tomorrow at 10. The coffee shop had those stubborn wooden chairs that make you sit up straight whether you intend to or not, panes of glass scrubbed so clean the morning slid through without apology, and a steady chorus of cups touching saucers that felt almost ceremonial. So when Ethan arrived, hoodie traded for a simple button-down, hair still refusing to choose a direction, hearing aids catching the light like small moons, he paused on the threshold as if asking permission from a room that owed him nothing. And when I stood, he saw my mouth form his name and answered with the shape of a smile I hadn't seen on him under those chandeliers. He signed high, 2 fingers brushing the palm, then spoke softly for me, choosing both routes at once the way a river splits and still calls itself one river, and told me he had moved out the week after the video, had found a place with windows that didn't stare at a skyline shaped by his father's decisions, had cut contact for now, and felt equal parts grief and relief, had enrolled in ASL classes where the first assignment was to learn to spell his own name with patience instead of apology, and had finally stepped into rooms where the noise is the right kind of loud, because it is made with hands and eyes, and bodies that understand conversation is not ownership. I told him that the last time anyone taught me a new alphabet, I was 5 and licking glue off construction paper, and that I had already registered for the community center's beginners class, though the confirmation email looked like a dare, and he laughed with his whole face, then reached across the small table and arranged my fingers one by one into MARY until my knuckles stopped arguing. And while the barista stalled with the mugs because he understood the gravity of a first spelling, we talked about boundaries like they were fences that keep cattle safe rather than obstacles, about how gratitude can turn into debt if you let it, about how what happened in that restaurant would rot if we harvested it for spectacle and not for change. So we agreed to let friendship stand on its own legs, to meet as often as our calendars and our courage allowed, to correct each other's mistakes without flinching, and to place the whole thing under a light that is honest but not cruel. He told me about the Tuesday night group that meets in the back of the library after closing, where the custodian props the door with a worn-out dictionary so families can push strollers through without jerking, where old men argue about baseball stats in signs too fast for beginners but still beautiful as weather, where a high schooler volunteers to voice for anyone who needs it until his math homework slaps the table and insists on being finished. And he said that when he introduced himself the first night, his name rising from his hands with the wobble of a newborn foal, a woman signed back, "Welcome," and he felt something settle behind his ribs, not because he was admitted to a club, but because he wasn't asked to leave pieces of himself at the door. I told him that I had started practicing at home with a mirror I had never liked, because it remembers me at my most tired, and how even the clumsiest attempts taught me that meaning has weight before it has sound, that timing is a kind of grammar, that eye contact, which in the hearing world is considered optional, polite if offered, becomes the very floor you stand on when speech lives in space. When our coffee arrived, I wrapped both hands around the cup as if to convince them to keep still, then let go, and signed thank you with the same care I would use to lift a newborn from a stranger's arms. And he nodded like a teacher who knows a student's triumph isn't in perfection, but in the refusal to quit. We traded small histories and long sentences, mine about thin walls and a calendar whose squares are all the same color until the rent is due, his about childhood dinners where silverware was quieter than expectations and tutors who measured progress with rulers instead of grace. And we did not pretend either story had an easy villain, though one man's behavior had played the part convincingly for one night that changed everything. He admitted that for years he had practiced speaking until his throat tangled, because therapists paid to insist speech is the only key handed him a door and refused to say it also locked, and he laughed a little when he confessed his relief at letting his voice be optional, not because he hated it, but because he liked having a choice. I admitted that for years I had practiced invisibility until I could set plates down without brushing air, and what scared me most after the video wasn't losing my job, but losing the quiet that had once passed for safety. I shaped my first full sentence without help. Slow, crooked, miraculous. My name Mary. Nice meet you. And he grinned like dawn breaking between buildings, not because I had performed for him, but because I had met him in a language that didn't ask him to leave parts of himself outside. We talked next steps, not headlines. He would text me vocabby, lists that don't show up on beginner worksheets, restaurant signs, kitchen signs, ways to ask allergy. Without panic, I would show up to Tuesday night group with a notebook and the humility to stop writing and start watching. We would keep our friendship resolutely unsavior-like by sharing the check and the silence. We would draft a small plan for the staff at my next restaurant, if they'd have me, to learn 3 phrases well enough to mean them. How can I help? Do you prefer text? Your pace is mine. We didn't pretend any of it was novel. Movements older than both of us had used their hands to make room long before our clip, and we promised to learn the names that deserved to be said before ours. I told him that crisis had peeled something from me that I didn't want back, the willingness to swallow humiliation because tips help with rent, and that I intended to keep that layer off even when the adrenaline left, which it had begun to do, leaving behind a tired that felt earned rather than depleted. He admitted he had been practicing another sentence he wanted to say to himself and mean, and he signed it for me, each word landing like a small stone. I am enough then spoke it too, because some truths are worth the echo. We sat there a while with the city's noon leaning through the glass, and neither of us felt the need to fill it. And when our cups showed their bottoms like moons in eclipse, we stood at the same time and laughed at our coordination as if it were an omen. If I learn the language, I learn the people, not as exhibits but as neighbors. And the work of learning won't stop when the cameras do. At the counter, while I fumbled with a tip jar whose slot seemed built to insult large bills, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen expecting another DM shaped like a lifeline or a landmine, but a news alert had climbed to the top with the calm of a church bell. CEO steps down amid controversy. I turned the screen so Ethan could see the headline. He looked at it for half a breath, then looked back at me, and we both exhaled. The first thing the new manager did was hand me a clean apron and a schedule that didn't look like punishment disguised as math, and the second thing he did was say, please, when asking if I would consider covering a brunch next week. And the shock of the word, small, domesticated, too often caged, made something in my shoulders release. So by the end of the first shift, my spine had learned a new angle, and my feet had forgiven me for years of running on concrete for men who snapped their fingers. The restaurant itself wasn't fancy, not in the chandelier way. It had chalkboards that changed their minds daily, copper pans that earned their shine with honest fire, a staff meal taken at one long table before doors opened where the line cook with the dragon tattoo quizzed us on specials between mouthfuls, and a front-of-house lead who passed around a laminated sheet titled Access Basics, like a recipe we were all going. To learn together, I brought my own additions to the sheet, the ones Ethan and I drafted between coffees and class, and stood in pre-shift beside a host who'd learned 3 signs off YouTube and was hungry for the 4th. And I taught the room how to ask, "How can I help?" With hands open instead of upturned, "Do you prefer text?" With a phone offered like a bridge, not a demand. And your pace is mine, with the pause built into the middle where the patience lives. The dishwasher, who usually kept his words in a pocket, signed thank you back with a shake in his wrist that told me he'd been hurt by a language once and was trying another door, and I mirrored the tremor on purpose so he'd know it was allowed. Policy followed practice. We added icon menus that didn't infantilize. We checked the contrast on our printed specials. We killed the music when the room got full because clatter is already a symphony. And we taped a small card behind the host stand with the local interpreter line for emergencies, next to the fire extinguisher's inspection date, because fire isn't the only thing that can ruin a night. After shifts, when the last table's laughter thinned, and the brooms were making their slow, respectful passes, I walked the 6 blocks to the community center where the beginners class met, and I sat in a circle of strangers whose eagerness made the air feel carbonated, and I let my hands learn verbs the way a muscle learns to trust its own weight. Want, need, understand, wait, try, sorry, again. The most useful vocabulary I've ever owned. On Thursdays, I stayed late to volunteer with the toddlers. They were ruthless in their feedback, celebrating my successes with delighted squeals and correcting my sloppiness by simply refusing to look at me until I cleaned it up. And if anyone wants to humble themselves into precision, I recommend being coached by a 3-year-old whose entire being insists communication is play, and play is serious. Back at work, the changes were both plain and invisible, as most real changes are. We didn't hang a banner to congratulate ourselves. We just got better at hospitality by expanding our definition of who counts as a guest. And the tips reflected something I'm almost embarrassed to write. Appreciation feels different when it includes understanding, as if the numbers start to carry the weight of what stayed unspoken. The owner, who kept his hair in a graying knot and wore grief on his ring finger, started joining pre-shift to learn a sign a day with all the ceremony of someone apprenticing under a craft, and he practiced welcome with such intent that even on nights when he forgot the wrists, the message still landed. One evening, a mother came in with a boy whose eyes were all the brand names in the room until they weren't. I brought waters, crouched to their level, asked if text was easier, and when she signed thank you, her hands shook the way nerves do when they've been scolded for needing anything. So I matched her tempo and mirrored the tremor back like an oath, and her eyes filled with the kind of relief you can't plate but you can feed. The city's noise didn't leave me. It just changed keys. The fundraiser money, more than I can comprehend without feeling like I've stolen something, sat in an account with a label I named Breathing, and I paid the back rent and moved to a place with thicker walls where neighbors argue in complete sentences instead of slamming the same drawer for months, and I wrote my first budget that wasn't a fight but a plan. When I passed the old block, the building's bricks remembered me without accusation, and I waved anyway, because surviving the past is not the same as resenting it. In the quieter nights, when my body forgot the choreography of panic, I found I was not emptied by the day's work the way I used to be, because respect doesn't cost as much to carry. Of course, the headlines kept their drumbeat. The clip still had legs longer than gossip, and journalists reached for my number with questions that wanted tidy arcs and villains who do not exist in the plural, and I learned to say no to cameras the same way I learned to say no to finger snaps, with kindness that doesn't apologize. A local station asked for a segment about our inspiring inclusive makeover, and the owner said the only way he'd do it is if the segment was voiced and signed and captioned, and when they balked at the time that would take, he told them that was the point. They declined, so we went back to work. If I was loud for a night, I will be steady for years. Because courage that only shows up for applause is not courage, it's theater, and I am done performing my survival. Near closing on a Tuesday, my phone pulsed with an alert that didn't feel like news so much as arithmetic finally balancing its account. Hartwell resigns amid backlash. Board announces interim CEO. The headline was the same tune the earlier alert had hummed, but now the story had footnotes. Clients gone, contracts voided, investors colder than his eyes had once been, an empire discovering the weight of consent withheld. I didn't toast or smirk. I wiped a table with the same care I use on crystal, then stacked the chairs, because some victories are best honored by continuing the work that made them possible. I locked the front door and pressed my palm against the glass, saw my reflection standing taller than I remembered, and understood that consequences had drafted their resignation letter and sent it certified. He lost the thing he never thought he'd need, our consent. Power rarely imagines a future in which rooms fail to realign when it enters, so the first loss wasn't dollars, though those bled obediently. It was weather. Meetings where assistants used to stiffen like flags went slack, elevators that once paused now closed without ceremony, maitre d's who had rehearsed half bows remembered spines, and the city recalibrated the gravitational math that had let one man's appetite bend air. The resignation statement arrived with all the euphemisms legal can buy, and still the numbers told the truth. Clients migrated like geese to noiseless lakes. Vendors discovered other addresses. The board learned how to say fiduciary duty without swallowing. He kept his houses and his art, of course, and the watch he used to check when other people talked, but the ground stopped translating those artifacts into deference. That conversion rate is what collapsed. I didn't haunt the comment sections. I've seen what they do to the soft parts of the day. Instead, I moved. The new apartment is 2 floors up in a building that minds its business and repairs its stairwell light without prompting, with a window that offers an honest rectangle of sky and a kitchen that can hold 2 bodies without making either of them feel like an apology. The first night I slept there, the quiet wasn't threatening. It didn't hiss like the intermission before the next humiliation. It was a large bowl set on a table and filled with water that did not rock, and I woke to find my jaw had unclenched sometime before dawn, a tiny miracle disguised as rest. I took the eviction notice I'd saved as a reminder that math has teeth and fed it to a shredder at the community center with a pleasure that felt like discipline, then bought a doormat because having someplace to wipe dust is one way of telling yourself you intend to stay. At work, the routines grew roots. New hires came and learned the signs alongside knife safety. Regulars learned to spell their names at the host stand while their kids made a game of it. And the pre-shift question became, what did you learn this week instead of who messed up last night? Which is the kind of pivot that turns a staff into a room full of teachers who also happen to carry plates. The owner installed a small shelf by the server station with a basket labeled ears, which held spare batteries for hearing aids alongside pens and wine keys because needs deserve proximity, not pity. When a server from a slicker place came by to scope us out and asked if all this effort really mattered, the dishwasher, newly chatty, signed yes and said it aloud too, and the question went to compost. I kept a ritual for the past. I folded my old apron, food stains ghosted into it like faint continents, and slipped into its pocket a square of yellow paper with enough block printed in my careful caps. Not as an epigraph for suffering, but as an oath for the next time my mouth tries to bargain with fear, and I left the apron with the community center's costume box where kids pick outfits to rehearse futures. The fundraiser account, renamed Building, started to fund small things with large shadows. A coffee for the interpreter who always stays late to talk to the last teenager, a bus pass for the grandmother who never misses class, a coil-bound printing of the beginner curriculum with photos that look like the people in our room, not stock models, and a set of clip-on lights for the back corner where the sign for home deserves to be seen. I told the organizer who started the fund that I would show receipts, literal and spiritual. She told me that accountability is love with a ledger. On a Wednesday when rain made the city feel like someone had wrung it out, I wrote enough again, this time on the whiteboard at pre-shift in a looser hand, and underneath it I added for today. Because abundance isn't a cliff you leap from once, it's a practice of distributing your weight where the floor actually is. News about him kept trickling like a faucet you've decided to live with until payday. Interim CEOs, exploratory committees, a glossy magazine profile that tried to lacquer his childhood onto the present as if empathy were a solvent for harm. And I did the thing I promised myself under those chandeliers. I neither gloated nor forgave for sport. Some afternoons, when memory played one of its old films and I felt my breath shorten, I walked to the library to sit with Tuesday night group, even if I had work later, because watching a room of people say family with their hands will rehydrate the driest hours. Ethan thrived there in ways that sounded like verbs. He mentored, he organized, he listened. He said no to a documentary pitch that wanted him to narrate pain for an audience that had not earned it. And he said yes to teaching an intro class where he would show the sentence, "I am enough," to beginners, then wait for them to trust it. At the restaurant, a woman in a navy suit snapped for a check like she was popping a whip, and one of our new servers, 19 sharp, terrified, turned to stone in the aisle, so I stepped beside her, set down my tray, and said to the customer in a voice that could not be mistaken for a request, "We don't respond to snaps here. You can say, 'Excuse me,' or 'I'll be back when you're ready,'" and the woman's face did the thing faces do when they realize the weather has changed, and the kid's shoulders lifted a fraction as if discovering she had been wearing a cloak she could shrug off. After the woman paid and left a tip that tried to argue with her behavior, we split it evenly and then taught each other the sign for respect one more time, just to watch our hands become policy. Standing up cost me a job. Not standing would have cost me myself. And the math of that is no longer negotiable, not in dining rooms, not in friendships, not in the small city where I sleep. Class nights are my favorite nights because they end with laughter even when the drills are hard. Ethan taps his watch like a coach, not like a boss, and I pack my bag, pull the new apron over a shirt that doesn't carry grease from somewhere I don't belong anymore, and we walk out into air that smells like rain and cumin from the taco cart and possibility. "Class starts in 5, he says, grinning, and I answer by signing ready with both hands. Steady. Sometimes the smallest voice brings down the biggest giant. 2 months is both a sliver and a lifetime, and in that span the extraordinary burned down into embers that heat the day without drawing a crowd. At work I sign orders when a regular prefers hands to voices, spell names at the host stand with kids eager to catch me in a finger mistake and correct me like referees. And while my colleagues tease me for labeling the mise en place in both English and gloss, they also borrow my markers without asking because the habit has migrated from novelty to normal. The first time an elderly couple came in and the husband's hearing aids squealed at the room's ordinary clatter, the owner moved them to a corner without making the rest of the dining room carry the shame, dimmed the bulbs a notch, killed the playlist, and we all watched a night be rescued by adjustments so small they would have been invisible if not for the relief that followed. Ethan has become the kind of busy that isn't frantic, it's fruitful. He co-facilitates Tuesday nights now, alternating between voicing and signing as needed, and he has learned how to steer a conversation without using volume as a weapon, which is a trick most leaders never learn. He invited his old therapist to a panel about choice in communication, and when the man showed up with a posture I recognized from the golden palm, the pose of a person expecting to be deferred to, Ethan handed him a folding chair and a printed agenda and said, with a respect that wasn't a bribe, "You can listen first," and the man did. Watching that, I understood something about redemption I hadn't before. It doesn't mean pretending harm didn't happen, it means refusing to buy its sequel. We have developed a ritual for difficult days. I text him a sentence I'm afraid to sign because my hands feel like clumsy birds, and he sends back a video of his own hands slowing the grammar until mine can catch it. He still thanks me sometimes for that night in the restaurant, and I still tell him the truth. It was never mine to save him. I only refused to be useful to cruelty, and the conversation ends with a shared grin that belongs to co-conspirators, not saviors. When press emails arrive in my inbox with subject lines that promise exclusive access to my pain, I say no with a politeness that is a boundary, not an apology, and redirect them toward organizations that have been doing this work since before I was born. Sometimes they actually go. On a slammed Saturday, a new hire froze mid-aisle under the snap of a man who believed urgency is a crown he can wear without earning it, and the old choreography flared for an instant in my muscles, duck, nod, soothe, until the woman I am now put a hand on the kid's elbow, turned toward the table with a stillness that could not be mistaken for deference, and said, "We don't answer to snaps," while my left hand, almost without asking, floated up and signed "no," and in that twin gesture the room learned or remembered, and the kid found her lungs again. The fundraiser account has kept its promise to be more than my parachute. Last week it paid for a set of pocket cards with basic ASL that we hand to guests who want to learn how to sign "thank you" before dessert. And you would not believe the number of grown men who become tender at a 2-word lesson when no one is grading them. We also purchased a captioning tablet for the corner of the bar where the sports live, because access to trivial joy is still access. And the bartender, who insisted he doesn't have a sentimental bone, wiped his eyes when a regular who hasn't been able to follow play-by-plays in years leaned in and laughed at the right time. The owner keeps an envelope of cash in the safe labeled rides for nights when someone needs a lift home that doesn't gambled on the subway. And the note inside says, "Use this with dignity, because charity without dignity is just a different kind of hunger." Outside our little orbit, the city goes on inventing emergencies for itself, as all cities do. I pass the Golden Palm sometimes on my way to the community center, and through its tall windows I can see nothing has changed and everything has. The chandeliers still believe in their own importance, but the staff looks a little less brittle. Or maybe I'm projecting a hope onto strangers that I should reserve for myself. Once I saw a server there touch a guest's shoulder gently to get into her eye line, instead of shouting from the wrong angle, and I stood on the sidewalk and blessed her under my breath like a parishioner who recognizes a sacrament. I will keep choosing kindness over fear, voice over silence, people over power, not as an anthem to be sung once, but as the daily arithmetic that decides where I place my body when someone else is being made small. When the restaurant empties and the chairs reverse onto tables like sleeping horses, I stay a few minutes in the hush to count the day's small mercies. An apology that arrived on time and without excuses. A toddler who insisted on teaching me the sign for butterfly 5 times because her hands loved the way it felt. A tip that came tucked inside a note that said, "I felt seen without being watched." And then, I walk home the long way, because the night is friendly again. My apartment door opens to the smell of yeast from a neighbor's bread, and the faint carry of music that could be a lullaby or a hymn depending on who's listening. And I find myself doing something I haven't done since I was a kid. I narrate the day to no one, out loud sometimes, because hearing my own voice without bracing for someone to punish it has become its own medicine. On Mondays, Ethan and I volunteer at the beginners class and watch the new ones make sentences where there were only letters last week. And it is impossible to leave that room without believing in the future, because nothing says tomorrow quite like a pair of hands learning how to say I and you and enough and together without tripping. We've started keeping a list on the whiteboard of words we want to learn, not because we need them for crisis, but because we want them for joy. Cinnamon, river, dance, rest, home. And each new sign pins the world to the map in a way that talking never managed. Near closing, the door chime rings, and a couple steps in with the look people get when they aren't sure which rules are going to be used against them. I square my shoulders the way the new manager's please taut my spine, step toward them with my hands ready to match whatever pace they bring, and say, "Good evening, how can I help?" The question already poised in my wrists in case their answer prefers silence that isn't empty but full of meaning. And the night, which used to feel like a verdict, opens like a book we can read together, fade on hands, speaking, cameras off, dignity on.